my name's Julia, and in this video I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my string quartet number 17. There was a bit of a gap between this one and the previous quartets, which I'd written in a 5-month period, basically between October 2021 and February 2022. This one was written in October 2022, so a little bit of a gap. There's no particular reason for that. I just decided to look at some other things in between and then just felt like coming back to some string quartets. So this one actually started life as 2 separate pieces, I think you can probably tell. But I tried joining them together and I quite liked the effect, so I decided to leave it like that. The first section is a bit of a construction project. I love playing with the effects that you get of layering the same line over itself, but not necessarily in a key that you would expect. And I suppose really this goes back to the idea of fugues and contrapuntal writing of the Baroque era. It's that kind of idea. But I wanted to see what effect I got if I chose a very, very strict harmonic template and made absolutely no allowances. So if the notes clash, they clash. So this really is set up in the first section, although parts don't actually overlap that much in the first section. But it starts with a canon. So each part starts on the next note up of a minor 7th chord, a tonic triad, with the minor 7th on top. So as we're in E minor, the cello starts on the E, then the first violin starts on the G, the viola on the B, and then the second violin on the D. And to begin with, in this opening section, they don't really overlap, they just follow each other. So each time one part finishes, it takes up a note of this E minor 7th chord underneath, and it sort of pulses its way up the chord with these quavers under the melody. So this ramps up the tension to B, by which time everyone has played the melody at their various different pitches. And at B, a couple of new things appear. We get a new melody in the cello, which again gets passed around between the parts in the same order as before, and with the same changes in pitch as before. So the first violin starts a minor 3rd above the cello, the viola a perfect 5th above the cello, and then the second violin a minor 7th above. We also get this descending chromatic version of the pulsing accompaniment, and as the melody progresses through the parts, the texture thins out. So we have this big build up to B, followed by this gradual dropping back, until eventually we're left with just these harmonics as we come into D. And this is where we enter a link passage into the second part of the piece. So we change time signature, and against these harmonics, the cello starts to foreshadow what is to come. This is basically a version of the melody of the second section, but it still contains elements of the first melody we heard, so it's a bit of a hybrid. And it gets picked up and played with a bit by the other parts, until eventually it leads us to this big E minor moment at E. And no sooner have we re-established this E minor, and in comes the cello, and we're off into E major with the melody proper, and all of our harmonic ambiguity is gone. There are no more wrong notes, there are no more clashes here. This really is saying, we've arrived, here is our big tune. And we stay there for a little while, but not for very long. As soon as we get a counter melody coming in at F, we're off first of all into G major and then back into E minor. And via a little link passage, we then get into A minor. So although we started this big melody in E major, our major flavour didn't really last very long. And we go through another round of this, if you like, and then via a similar link passage we end up almost in D minor. But we don't quite want to go there. We really want to end up in E minor. That's where our home was. So I've just turned everything up a tone. There's nothing very subtle here, but that's not really what this piece is about. We just shift everything up a tone and end up back in E minor at J for what is effectively the return of our opening. I tried at J initially just launching back into the opening theme, but it didn't quite work because of the sudden change of time signature, and I suspect it might have been quite difficult to play. So I inserted this introductory passage which firmly re-establishes the 4 in a bar and the E minor, and gives us a very solid basis from which to build up all of the contrapuntal parts, and it also keeps the momentum going. And interestingly, I think because the momentum is established here, you still keep the momentum even after these big syncopated chords, which are what is driving it, have disappeared, because they sort of lock themselves in your mind. And I think that's quite an important thing in a string quartet where you have a limited number of voices. So you can't necessarily keep everything going that you want because you've only got the 4 lines to play with. So this idea of creating the impression that something's still there even when it isn't is an interesting thing to play around with. So from K, our opening melody returns. And again, we hear it at different pitches in different parts, just as we did before. But this time the parts do overlap. Now we're really into our fugue. So the first violin comes in 2 bars after the cello, the viola 2 bars after that, and so on. And we go through both halves of the opening melody again, and we end up once again on these chords made up of natural harmonics. And just to tie it up, the cello gives us a short little reminder of the middle section, just to remind us where we've been.